Picture a drop of silver sitting in the palm of a glove. It does not hold still. It trembles, splits into smaller beads, rolls, and gathers itself back together, like something alive. Lay a piece of iron on top of it, and the iron does not sink. It floats. This is a metal that breaks almost every rule you were ever taught about what a metal is. 2,000 years ago, beneath a hill in China, a man had an entire river of it built to flow around his body forever. His tomb has never been opened. The people who study it believe that somewhere under that mound, a lake of this metal is still sitting in the dark, too poisonous to disturb. It drove whole trades quietly insane. It poisoned a bay so badly that the cats there danced and threw themselves into the sea. And today, one drop at a time, it climbs up through the fish in the ocean toward the plate in front of you. And it is the one metal that the nations of the world have formally agreed to get rid of. Not to mine more of, to banish. Through a treaty named after the town where it did its worst. Its name is Mercury, Quicksilver, living silver. And I've read enough about it to tell you that almost everything that ever made people love it is the same thing that made it deadly. Before we start, sit with 4 questions. Why did a metal that flows like water convince some of the smartest people in history that it held the secret to eternal life? How did the same shining silver give us mirrors, gilded domes, and the first real instruments to measure the world, and leave a trail of ruined bodies behind every one of them? What exactly is the river hidden inside the tomb of China's first emperor? And why is everyone still afraid to look? And why, for the first time with any metal, did humanity decide not to dig up more, but to hunt it down and lock it away? Do not confuse it with the planet that shares its name. This is the element. And by the end of this, a thermometer, a mirror, and a piece of fish are going to look different to you. Start with the strangeness, because the strangeness is the whole reason this story exists. Mercury is the only metal that is liquid at ordinary room temperature. Every other metal you can name, iron, gold, copper, lead, is a hard solid in your hand, and you have to heat it fiercely before it will melt and pour. Mercury is already pouring. You would have to chill it down to nearly 40 degrees below zero before it finally freezes into a solid you could hammer. And it is astonishingly heavy. Mercury is more than 13 times denser than water. It is so dense that objects we think of as heavy, a lump of iron, even a lump of lead, will float on its surface instead of sinking, bobbing there like a cork on a pond. Imagine a liquid so heavy that a cannonball rides on top of it. That is Mercury. It rolls into trembling silver beads that chase each other across a table. It gives off an invisible vapor with no smell to warn you, even when it just sits in an open dish at room temperature. And it does one more thing that, to older eyes, looked like pure magic. It reaches out and swallows other metals. Drop a flake of gold onto Mercury, and the gold vanishes into it, dissolving like sugar into tea, forming a soft, silvery paste. Now try to see this the way a person 3,000 years ago would have seen it. Here is a metal that flows like water, that shivers like a living thing, that is heavier than lead, and that can drink gold. To the ancient world, this was far more than another material dug out of the ground. It seemed to sit somewhere between the living and the dead. The Greeks and Romans called it hydrargyrum, water silver, which is where its chemical symbol comes from. In English, it became quicksilver, from an old word meaning living. So it is no accident that Mercury landed at the very center of alchemy. For centuries, alchemists believed that this restless silver liquid was one of the fundamental principles of all matter, a kind of pure, shifting essence that ordinary metals were only crude versions of. If you could just master Mercury, the thinking went, you might turn lead into gold. You might even brew the philosopher's stone, the legendary substance said to cure any illness and hold off death itself. To the alchemists, Mercury was not one substance among many. It was one of the deep principles they believed all metals were made from. the fluid, changeable soul of matter itself. If ordinary lead was mercury in a fixed, imperfect body, then perhaps, with the right art, you could loosen it, purify it, and let it settle into the perfect body of gold. This was not stupidity. It was the best theory available in a world that did not yet know what an atom was, built on watching a metal behave like nothing else on Earth. That dream was powerful enough to pull in one of the greatest minds who ever lived. Isaac Newton, the man who mapped gravity and split light into color, spent years of his life on secret alchemical experiments, many of them involving mercury. Long after his death, samples of his hair were tested, and they showed unusually high levels of the metal. Some historians suspect that the strange breakdown Newton suffered in the 1690s, months of paranoia and sleeplessness, may have had something to do with what he was breathing over his furnace. Newton, at least, survived it and lived to old age, but he was only chasing gold and knowledge. Centuries earlier, another man had wanted something far larger from this metal. He did not want it to make him rich. He wanted it to make him immortal. And he had the power to command an entire river of it. His name was Ying Zheng, and by the year 221 before our era, he had done something no one before him had managed. He had conquered the warring kingdoms of China and welded them into a single empire, crowning himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. You have almost certainly seen a piece of his tomb, even if you did not know it. The terracotta army, those thousands of life-sized clay soldiers standing in silent ranks, was discovered by farmers digging a well in the 1970s. But here is the part people forget. That vast army is not the tomb. It is only the guard. The soldiers stand watch, faces outward, protecting something buried nearby that has never been opened. Under a great earthen mound lies the actual burial chamber of the emperor himself. The scale of the thing is hard to take in. Ancient accounts say the tomb complex took decades to build and a workforce numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The emperor is said to have begun planning his own resting place almost as soon as he took the throne, as a young man, as though the whole point of ruling the world was to prepare a smaller, perfect world to be buried in. Everything about it was designed to last forever, including, it seems, the poison at its heart. And we have a description of what is supposed to be inside it, written by the historian Sima Qian about 100 years after the emperor died. He wrote that the tomb was built as a model of the whole world, a ceiling set with the heavens, the stars and constellations picked out above, and below them the land of China recreated in miniature, with its great rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze, and even the sea, all fashioned out of flowing mercury, kept in motion by hidden machinery so that the silver rivers would run forever around the dead emperor. The same account describes the tomb as a fortress against intruders, rigged with crossbows set to fire automatically at anyone who broke in. And it tells a chilling detail about the workers. To keep the secrets of the tomb, the location of its treasures and the workings of its traps, the craftsmen who built the inner chamber are said to have been sealed inside it, entombed alive with the mechanisms they had made. For a long time, that reads like exactly the kind of legend that grows up around a god king. A river of liquid silver running by magic under a hill. It is the sort of thing ancient historians loved to write, and modern historians love to doubt. Except the ground itself seems to be telling the same story. Starting in the 1980s, and again in a survey around 2003, scientists tested the soil across the burial mound. Out in the surrounding earth, mercury levels were low, ordinary background amounts. But directly over the hidden chamber, the readings climbed sharply, many times higher than the land around them, with some spots higher still. And when researchers mapped where the mercury was strongest, the pattern was not random. It roughly matched the shape of where China's rivers and sea would sit on a map. The silver rivers Sima Qian described may actually be down there, still. So why not simply dig it up and see? This is one of the most tantalizing sealed tombs on Earth, and yet archaeologists have deliberately left it shut. Part of the reason is preservation. The moment you let air and moisture into a chamber sealed for 2,000 years, you risk destroying the very things you came to find. When the terracotta soldiers were first unearthed, they were painted in bright colors, and much of that paint flaked away within a short time of meeting the open air. Nobody wants to make that mistake on a far greater scale, and part of the reason is simpler and darker. If the accounts are right, opening that chamber means opening a room that has been filling with toxic mercury vapors since before the Roman Empire. There is a bitter irony sitting at the bottom of all this. By several accounts, the first emperor was obsessed with living forever. He sent expeditions to search for the elixir of immortality, and the physicians of his court are thought to have fed him tonics meant to grant eternal life. Some of those elixirs in that era were made with mercury and cinnabar, its red ore, in the belief that this deathless-seeming metal could pass its permanence to a human body. If that is true, then the emperor may have slowly poisoned himself with the very substance he trusted to save him, and then been laid to rest in a river of it. He died, as it happens, on the road, in the middle of a long journey across his empire, still chasing the promise of an elixir that would let him rule forever. His officials, fearing chaos if the news broke too soon, are said to have hidden his death for weeks, traveling with the decaying body and, by one account, packing the imperial carriage with salted fish to disguise the smell. The man who wanted to conquer death could not even keep his own passing from turning into a grim farce. He believed Mercury was the road to eternal life. It would take the rest of the world a very long time, and a great many ruined people to learn the opposite. This silver did not grant long life. It quietly stole the mind. The trouble is that Mercury is genuinely, seductively useful and often beautiful. And for most of history, the beauty arrived long before anyone understood the price. Its main ore is a stone called cinnabar, a deep, glowing red. Grind that stone into powder and you get vermilion, one of the most prized red pigments in the ancient and medieval world, the red of imperial robes and sacred paintings. People wore mercury, in a sense, and painted their gods with it for centuries before they fully understood what it was doing to the miners who dug it and the artisans who ground it. That is not to say nobody noticed. As far back as ancient Rome, the writer Pliny the Elder recorded that working with mercury and its ores was dangerous, and that the mines were worked by slaves and convicts whose lives were treated as expendable. The knowledge that this beautiful red stone could kill the people who handled it existed almost from the beginning. It was simply set against how useful and valuable the metal was, and again, usefulness won. Then there were the mirrors. For a long stretch of history, the finest mirrors in Europe, the famous glass from Venice, were made by laying a sheet of tin against the glass and pressing liquid mercury over it, bonding a bright reflective skin to the back. The results were dazzling and hugely valuable. But the workers who made them breathed mercury fumes in close rooms for years, and paid for those perfect reflections with tremors and rotting teeth and shattered health. The same quiet arithmetic ran through the art of gilding. If you want to cover a statue or a great cathedral dome in gold, one old method is to mix the gold with mercury into a paste, spread it over the surface, and then heat it. The mercury boils away as invisible vapor, leaving a flawless layer of gold behind, and drifting straight into the lungs of the person holding the torch. The gleaming golden domes that crowned some famous old buildings were, in part, paid for in the lives of the gilders. By some accounts, when one great cathedral dome was gilded this way, dozens of the workers died, and mercury measured the world. Because it is heavy, and because it expands smoothly and predictably as it warms, it turned out to be almost perfect for scientific instruments. In 1643, an Italian named Evangelista Torricelli stood a tube of mercury upside down in a dish and created the first barometer, proving that the air itself has weight and can be weighed. Decades later, in 1714, Daniel Fahrenheit sealed mercury into a thin glass tube and built the mercury thermometer, the device that let humanity finally put a precise number on hot and cold. For 300 years, a sliver of this poison in a glass tube was how we read our own fevers. But the cruelest story of all belonged to the hat makers. To turn animal fur into smooth, tight felt for a fashionable hat, workers used a solution containing mercury, brushing it onto the fur in a process called kerating. It worked beautifully. It also filled the hot, cramped workshops with mercury vapor, day after day, year after year. And slowly, the hatters began to change. Their hands developed a violent tremor, so common that it earned its own grim nickname, the Hatter's Shakes. Their teeth loosened and fell out. But the vapor did not stop at the body. It reached into the brain. The hatters grew painfully shy and anxious, then irritable, then paranoid. Some suffered hallucinations. Their personalities frayed and came apart. Doctors gave the condition a name, erethism. But the world already had a phrase for what it saw: mad as a hatter. An entire trade was quietly losing its mind at the workbench, and for a long time, nobody understood why. That phrase and that image of the unraveling hatter worked its way so deeply into culture that it helped shape one of the most famous characters in English literature, the Hatter of Alice in Wonderland. This was not some rare, exotic affliction. In hat-making towns, it was an occupational fact of life. In the United States, the town of Danbury, Connecticut was so central to the hat trade that the tremor had a local name, the Danbury Shakes. And the astonishing part is how long it was tolerated. Even after the cause was well understood, mercury was still used to make hats in America until the middle of the 20th century, when it was finally dropped, by which point generations of workers had already paid for the fashion with their nerves. For all of that, though, the victims were mostly the people who worked directly with the metal. Miners, gilders, mirror makers, hatters. You could, if you were lucky and not a craftsman, keep your distance. But Mercury was about to find a way to reach people who never touched it at all. People whose only mistake was to eat fish from the wrong bay. Minamata is a small fishing town on the coast of Japan. For much of the 20th century, its life revolved around the sea and around a large chemical factory run by a company called Chiso, which for decades was the town's great employer. From the 1930s onward, that factory poured its wastewater into Minamata Bay. Among the waste was mercury, a byproduct of the chemistry going on inside. On its own, the kind of mercury released was already dangerous, but something happened in the mud of the bay that made it far worse. Bacteria in the sediment took that mercury and chemically transformed it into a compound called methylmercury, a form that living tissue absorbs greedily and struggles to expel. And then it began to climb. Tiny organisms took up the methylmercury. Small fish ate the tiny organisms and concentrated it in their flesh. Bigger fish ate the small fish and concentrated it further. At each step up the food chain, the poison did not dilute. It gathered, multiplying in the bodies of the very fish the town depended on for dinner. The scale of that concentration is hard to picture. By the time methylmercury has climbed from seawater into the flesh of a large predatory fish, it can be present at levels many thousands of times higher than in the water around it. A single big fish is, in effect, a collector, quietly gathering into its body the mercury that was spread thin across everything it ever ate. In Minamata, the sea looked clean. The danger was hidden inside the catch. The first ones to show it were the cats. In the early 1950s, the cats of Minamata, who lived on scraps of fish, began to move strangely. They convulsed, stumbled in circles, and, in scenes the townspeople never forgot, some ran to the sea and threw themselves in. People called it the dancing cat disease, and did not yet understand that it was a warning meant for them. Then it reached the families. People developed numbness in their hands and lips, then a loss of coordination, slurred speech, tunnel vision, deafness, violent convulsions. Some fell into comas and died. And most heartbreaking of all, children began to be born already damaged, poisoned in the womb by fish their mothers had eaten while pregnant, arriving in the world with severe disabilities they had done nothing to earn. The illness got a name from the town it destroyed, Minamata disease. The disease was formally identified in 1956, once doctors realized that these scattered, terrifying cases were all connected to something in the local seafood. And yet, the factory kept discharging its mercury waste for years afterward, into the late 1960s. For a long time, the source was denied and disputed, even as the evidence pointed straight back to the bay. The world might never have felt the full weight of it without one photograph. In the early 1970s, the American photographer Eugene Smith and his wife Eileen spent years living in Minamata and documenting the victims. One of his images, of a mother cradling her severely disabled daughter in a traditional Japanese bath, looking down at her with a tenderness that is almost unbearable, ran in magazines around the world. It did what columns of numbers never could. It made a distant chemical tragedy into a human face that people could not look away from. What followed was decades of denial, of the company and officials resisting responsibility while more people sickened, and of victims fighting for recognition and compensation that came slowly and never felt like enough. In the area around Minamata, the number of people officially recognized as affected eventually reached into the tens of thousands, with many more cases believed to have gone uncounted. It became one of the most infamous industrial poisonings in human history, and a permanent lesson in what this metal can do when it gets loose in water. And here's the part that pulls the whole thing out of the history books and into your own kitchen. The mechanism that poisoned Minamata, methylmercury building up as it climbs the food chain, did not stay in that one bay. It happens, on a smaller scale, in oceans everywhere. Mercury from many sources settles into the sea. Bacteria convert some of it, and it works its way up into the big predatory fish, the tuna, the swordfish, the shark. That is exactly why health authorities tell pregnant women to limit how much of those top predator fish they eat, because methylmercury can cross from mother to child and reach a developing brain. If you eat fish, take a second and think about which fish and how often. Tell me in the comments whether this changes what you order. I read them. Minamata gave the world a word for the horror of mercury poisoning. And in the end, it gave its name to something larger, something that had never happened before with any metal at all. Think about how the story of almost every metal goes. We find it, we learn to use it, and then we spend the rest of history trying to dig up more and more of it. Iron, copper, aluminum, the rare metals of modern technology. The arrow only ever points one way, toward more. Mercury is the one that broke the pattern. It is the metal humanity looked at, understood at last, and decided to walk away from. You can see it in the mines. Almaden, in Spain, was the greatest mercury mine in history. It was worked since Roman times, when Cinnabar was dug by convicts and the condemned, for whom a sentence to the mercury mines was widely understood to be a slow death. Almaden produced the metal for something like 2,000 years. In 2002, it closed. The oldest mercury mine on Earth simply stopped. And in 2013, the nations of the world signed a treaty to bind mercury as tightly as they could manage. They named it, deliberately, the Minamata Convention, so that the name of that ruined Japanese bay would sit at the center of the agreement forever. It works to shut down mercury mining, to phase the metal out of products, and to cut the emissions that carry it into the air and water. More than 140 countries have joined. One by one, mercury is being pulled out of the thermometers, the switches, the batteries, the lamps, and the tooth fillings where it used to live. That last one may surprise you. If you are old enough, there is a real chance you are carrying mercury in your own mouth right now. For well over a century, the standard silver-colored dental filling, called amalgam, was made by mixing silver and other metals with a large share of liquid mercury, roughly half the filling by weight. Used and hardened this way, it is generally considered stable and low risk in the mouth, which is why countless people still have these fillings today. But the direction of travel is clear. Under the Minamata Treaty, amalgam is being phased down, and dentists increasingly reach for mercury-free materials instead. A metal that spent a century sitting in human teeth is quietly being shown the door, and it still hides in stranger places. In some parts of the world, mercury compounds have turned up in skin-lightening creams, sold with the promise of a fairer complexion and delivering instead a slow dose of poison absorbed straight through the skin. Regulators keep finding and banning them, and they keep reappearing. 5,000 years after we first fell for it, mercury is still being sold as a path to beauty, and still quietly taking payment in health. But a poison with a 5,000-year history does not leave quietly. Even now, mercury has one enormous foothold, and it is a grim echo of the emperor and his gold. Around the world, in artisanal, small-scale gold mines, people still use mercury exactly the way it has been used for centuries, mixing it into crushed ore to pull the gold out as an amalgam, then burning off the mercury over an open flame, often with bare hands and no protection. By many estimates, this is now the single largest source of mercury pollution on the planet, and up to 20 million people, including women and children, work in it. The metal that promised the first emperor immortality is still, today, being burned off in the pursuit of gold, straight into human lungs and the world's rivers. And gold mining is not even the whole of it. A great deal of the mercury drifting through the air today comes from a more mundane source, the burning of coal, which contains traces of the metal and releases them up the smokestack by the ton. Between the mines, the coal, and the long human history of releasing it, the amount of mercury circulating in the atmosphere is now estimated to be several times higher than it was in natural pre-industrial times, by some measures a few 100% above the natural background. We did not just use this poison. We loaded the whole sky with a thin haze of it, so the arrow, for once, is trying to point the other way, toward less, toward none. But mercury does not respect our decisions. Once it is loose, it circulates, drifting through the air, settling into oceans, cycling through fish, for years and decades after it escapes. So what do you do with a metal like this? We spent thousands of years enchanted by it. We thought it was alive. We thought it could turn lead into gold and hold off death. We painted our gods with it, silvered our mirrors with it, gilded our cathedrals with it, and measured our own fevers with it. And every one of those gifts came stapled to the same bill. A slow, invisible theft of health and, too often, of the mind. Now we are trying for the first time to put a genie back in its bottle, and it is proving very hard, because this genie was never really contained in the first place. Here is the image I keep coming back to. Somewhere under a hill in China, in a chamber no living person has ever seen, a river of silver may still be running in the dark, exactly as an emperor commanded more than 2,000 years ago. It is beautiful. It is perfectly still on the surface of our knowledge, and lethal underneath, and we do not dare open it. There may be no more honest monument to Mercury than that. A gorgeous, poisoned river, sealed away, that we are too wise at last to disturb. The emperor searched this metal for eternal life, What he actually found, and what the hatters and the mirror makers and the families of Minamata all found after him, was a different kind of forever. Not endless life. An endless poison, one that outlasts the people who trusted it and keeps moving through the world long after they are gone. Thanks for staying with me. If this changed the way you see a simple drop of silver, hit like. And tell me in one word what stayed with you most. Say silver for the living metal that broke every rule. Say emperor for the river sealed inside the tomb. Say hatter for the trade that lost its mind. Say Minamata for the bay and the dancing cats. Or say fish for the poison still climbing toward your plate. Pick one word and drop it below. Subscribe, because the next element has just as many secrets hidden inside it. See you then.